welcome to the Bamboo Chalupa Digital Marketing Podcast. My name is Brett Snyder. I am the president of Knucklepuck, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Nate Shivar, the author of shivarweb.com.
Howdy.
So Nate and I were talking, and this is actually a pretty unique experience for us in the podcast, where most of our listeners probably don't realize that Nate is based outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and I actually live outside of Washington, D.C. in Northern Virginia. And so Nate and I worked together for a number of years when I did live in Atlanta, and it's how we met and kind of became professional and personal, colleagues and friends. But we've never actually recorded the podcast in person. And so for the first time in the history of Bamboo Chalupa, we are actually sitting in the Shivar Web Consulting offices in downtown Atlanta. And we are here actually having our first in-person episode. So we're excited to be able to look each other in the eye while we kind of share some of our experiences with digital marketing. And as I kind of came in and Nate was showing me around his office, we realized that our listeners probably don't know too much about us personally, about us as the hosts of this podcast. And we realized that this would be a great opportunity now that we have more than 20 episodes in the bank, and we really appreciate all of our loyal listeners helping us get to that point and keeping us motivated to produce more. We wanted to take some time to kind of let you get a chance to meet us, to know your hosts a little bit. We always tried to focus this podcast not on us. This isn't about us. This is about our listeners. But we wanted to give our listeners a little bit of a look into our professional careers, some personal case studies, some wins, some losses that we've experienced, just for anybody who maybe is a longtime member of the digital marketing community or somebody considering making a career change and just wants to get a sense of how to get started with that. And so for this episode, I am actually going to introduce and interview, like I said, my good friend and professional colleague, Nate Shivar here, and so that our listeners can get a sense of who he is, and he's had a very fascinating career, and we're excited to kind of give you guys a peek into that.
Yeah, welcome to Atlanta.
All right.
That's
so Nate,
awesome.
Tell us a little bit about how you got into digital marketing, kind of your background, what led you into where we are today at the 15th floor of the Hurt Plaza in downtown Atlanta. What was the path that you took to get here?
Yeah, so I have had a very non-traditional career. I started working with computers and just dabbling around on the internet back in 1996. And that was my first experience, but I never really had a path into digital marketing. I went to school to study international affairs at UGA, and then my first job out of college was actually at a lumber company. I've worked in plumbing. I've started my own businesses and done just a lot of different projects. But I actually ended up in the digital marketing world by starting up my own personal websites. I started a coffee blog on WordPress, and after that I started out, a gaming fan site, and I stumbled into the world of SEO specifically just because I finally made the connection where, if I write about certain things, all of a sudden people show up to this website that I hadn't really told people about.
And so tell us a little bit, everybody kind of talks about that. Everybody who finds out, I'm sure you get these questions a lot as well. It's like, oh, you work in SEO? How do you get me ranked on Google? And how do you get traffic from search engines like this? And it's interesting because I know you've had a very kind of non-traditional path, but your path has always come around with being able to provide resources to like-minded individuals, to people who are interested in the same things that you are interested in. And since you kind of fell into this naturally, but tell us about kind of when that clicked, you kind of realized that, holy crap, there's an opportunity for me to actually optimize these resources that I'm producing rather than just publishing them and hoping for the best.
Yeah, well, I was running that coffee website, and I stumbled on Moz's Beginner's Guide to SEO. I started reading about the background of that. And then I stumbled into Keyword Planner, or at the time it was Google's keyword tool, and just started messing around with it just because I was curious with it. And I made the connection between, if you target these keywords, you can show up for them. But I think it really clicked as far as, doing it as a career, doing it as a legitimate career path, was when I helped a buddy of mine out who owned a local business. And I basically reworked the structure of his website, made a couple technical changes, and he saw a real monetary impact on his business and started growing it. And that's when it really clicked in my head, like, oh, there's money in this. There's There's value in this. And so that's why I really dove headfirst into publishing and SEO and getting traffic to websites and whatnot.
I think that's really cool for anybody who's involved in SEO. I think that self-taught mentality is something that is very consistent among people in our field, where there is very little formal training or formal education for this. So you have to have that drive to go out there and say, all right, well, this is interesting to me. Why did this happen? How can I recreate that for, what you did for, what was the business that your buddy was in?
Yeah, we've actually mentioned him on the podcast, Easy Dent Repair in Athens, Georgia.
Oh, very cool. So when you were starting to work with Easy Dent Repair, you start to say, all right, I can apply a lot of these same principles. And I think that whole self-taught mentality is something that draws a lot of people to this industry because you are able to be as successful as you are willing to bust ass and work hard. And I think that's something that I know from working with you for a long time. This is how we come up with ideas for the podcast. It's how we come up with, concepts and strategies that we're going to run for clients. Nate and I still talk very regularly just in terms of, nuts and bolts, as we'll kind of call the blocking and tackling aspects of SEO. But when we talk about this whole idea of being self-taught, if you had to give somebody, obviously there's Moz, obviously there's kind of some of these larger ones. If you had to kind of give credit or pay homage to, a particular source or a resource that helped you get over that initial hump, what would that be?
I mean, Moz is the place in the SEO world. That's where all the beginner's guides are at. Google Webmasters, I think that's an undervalued resource among SEOs just because it's the default. But I think just reading around there can give you a lot of really good background. Two, I would say, as far as building a business and trying to figure out how to do marketing online, I think reading the material by Tim Ferriss, Noah Kagan, who writes over at okdork.com, their writing about marketing made it less corporate and less of a, you go to college and you study marketing and you do this and that, into something real and less daunting and attainable, and something that you could take an idea and practice it and go explore and get that kind of rapid learning feedback that will allow you to continue on and succeed. So I would put it to them.
Right, and I know that's something that I know is kind of an integral part of how you've built shiverweb.com, is you want to make sure that you can write content that your users or your readers are interested in. It's the way that we try to choose the episode topics and the content for the podcast. We want to make sure that we're providing content for people that we would want to read, that we would find valuable, to give people that push to be able to see the passion that you have for this industry and be able to translate that into their own particular circumstances.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit, what's your favorite part about, so you're now more on the publishing side. So actually, before we talk about that, tell us a little bit about that transition, because you did work in kind of the agency world. You did work for, at a number of, as you mentioned, your own businesses. You worked for other people's businesses, everything from service to products to B2B, software, e-com. You've kind of worked in a number of different industries, but tell us how that kind of pushed you towards understanding that publishing was really where you wanted to invest your time when you went out and really on your most recent business, that is, kind of the sole focus for you now. Tell us about that transition, focusing exclusively on the publishing side of things.
Yeah, so I think focusing on the publishing side really started when I was working full time in the agency world for Nebo Agency in Atlanta. Before I went into the agency world, I was bouncing around, freelancing, working on different small projects. And while I was learning a lot, it was very scattershot. It wasn't very focused. And so that's when I made the decision that I really needed to work in an agency that was doing marketing day in and day out for different clients. And that's when I went to Nebo. And that's where I really started to rapidly grow, not just in in the agency side and the SEO side, but I really got a sense of the different industries, where the money's at, and the different aspects of SEO. That there's a lot to this industry, whether it's selling, business development, getting the clients, the technical side, keyword research side, local side, link building. There's so many different aspects. And when I was working in the agency, I really had an interest and flair for translating keyword research and translating analytics into content strategy. And I think that was where I was best at. And that was also where I started to share a lot of ideas and to experiment a lot on my own blog. And, it really got traction. And I started to just play to my strengths more and more, where I could do the technical side, I could do the outreach side, but where I really enjoyed was to translate keyword research into understanding the intent and the problems that people were having and matching content to those questions and those queries. And so that's when I got into publishing.
Right. And I know that's something that you have been a heavy proponent of for years. I know there are folks that you mentor to this day where you want them to have a sandbox. You want them to have somewhere where you can read the theory, you can study the literature all you want, you can listen to digital marketing podcasts as much as you want, but you have to really have a place, a testing ground, somewhere where you can go out there and do the work and see the impact of it, not only from a learning and education side of things, but also just to be able to kind of keep that passion alive, to be able to say, all right, I can see this is pretty cool when it starts to work. And you get that excitement that builds around that.
Yeah, I know. In the agency world, you get to work with multi-million-dollar clients. You get to work with a lot of real brands and to do cool stuff. But the downside of it is that it's other people's websites. You have to make the recommendations. You have to make the case for implementing these ideas. And so a lot of times you don't get to see the potential payoff. Whereas when you have your own website and you can say, you know what, I'm going to see what the impact of schema is. You can go and implement it that day, fetch it in Webmaster Tools and see the impact that day. And keeping that feedback loop, that virtuous feedback loop, is something that can, at least for me, keep the burnout from setting in.
No, I think that's great. You talked a little bit about kind of analytics and keyword research as it translates into content strategy. I know that's a big part of the things that you write about and that you try to speak about. What would be some of your other favorite parts of this industry and this field in terms of your day-to-day work? Like, what's the thing where if you were selling me on moving into the publishing side of things, what is it that you were to, what would you tell me to kind of get me to go over to your side of things rather than for me, who has, been in the agency side for the entirety of my career and have not had an interest in doing anything else? What would be one of the best parts about the kind of content strategy and the publishing side of things that really keeps you going every day?
I think one is the fast pace of implementation. I think when you're trying to sell a content strategy to a B2B company or even a B2C, it can be really hard to make the case. And by the time you make the case, a lot of time the opportunity is passed. Whereas in the publishing side, it's all about figuring out what the right content is and getting it out fast. And when you get it out fast, you can get the positive feedback on it. You start to get the tweets, you get the traffic, you get the emails that come in, you get the revenue. And I think being able to do that fast and get that feedback loop fast is something that's just really exciting every day.
Well, I think what you're really talking about here is you're talking about social proof.
Oh, yeah.
You're able to have kind of that validation. It's almost this social currency by way of tweets. You get to see the analytics. I know you're big into analytics. You're able to see which content is most successful. How do we do more of that? Which content is not successful? How do we do less of that? But being able to really take that data-driven approach, sounds like something that really kind of keys in. And you get that. There's a psychological trigger, a benefit when you start to see, all right, new people are coming to view my site, or you're getting comments, you're getting social media recognition, you're starting to build your reputation, and it's reputation through the content you're producing, but at the same time, it's still your personal reputation. It's still something that gives you a very kind of individualized and personalized experience there.
And I would also save the money.
Yeah. Can't ignore the dollars and cents.
Yeah, the thing about publishing is that since you're paid by advertisers or you're paid by your customers who are if they're buying premium content, even though sure there's a lot more risk, there's a lot more reward. There's huge upsides to selling advertisers' products or selling your own products, and so I think that's
So tell us a little bit about that when you're kind of looking at how because I know you've done a decent amount of affiliate marketing as well, so you've got kind of different ways, and I think that's something the listeners would be really interested in is understanding that business side of things, understanding how does a publishing company make money? How are you able to leave a steady job with with an established company to go and start your own business around here? Tell us a little bit more about how you've kind of diversified the way that Shivar Web is actually able to be profitable and sustain you in your, pursuit of being able to create the best content and, really engage with your audience.
Yeah, I think this is This is a question I get asked a lot by not only readers, but also people in the industry, just because digital publishing is, this is something that the New York Times and BuzzFeed and all these big names in journalism are writing about a lot. There's a lot of these, the apocalypse is near, where journalism and publishing is dying. But I think really it comes down to finding the business model that works for your audience and really understands your audience. My audience is one that is very skeptical of a lot of, we'll call them digital marketers, internet marketers, the people where you go to their site, then you immediately get the pop-up for download our white paper, hire me. But they're also, they want something more substantial than what you will see on page view driven sites. And this is something where, you go and you see the top 10 most valuable SEO tools and you see pop-up ads, Google AdSense ads just littering all over the page, where, they're getting paid by page view. My business model is built around referral partnerships. So it's called affiliate marketing, but affiliate marketing, just like the SEO industry, that term has a lot of baggage. And so I treat it as referral partnerships, where if I'm building a tutorial around something like setting up a website, say around researching links, a lot of times those tutorials require a product or service. And those providers of products and services, whether it's say BuzzSumo, Ahrefs, HostGator, whoever, if I send them a customer, they will give me a referral fee. And what that does, it allows me to create quality content for free for my audience, but it also allows my referral partnerships to acquire a customer without having to spend a ton of money on advertising. And it allows my website visitors to get really high quality content for free that's not littered around with pop-up ads and all kind of awful stuff.
And what I think is interesting about that, and I think something that really resonates with your audience, is you don't make money from your audience. And right. I think that's what allows you don't make decisions. It's almost, you hear about this a lot of times with publicly traded companies, where they're beholden to their stockholders, where you are not beholden to anybody outside of the audience that you want to write to. You don't rely on them necessarily you do in a sense where you only generate revenue when those users click through, but it's something where it is an active decision that your users can choose to make or not make. And it's something where you're able to retain the integrity of that relationship with your audience without having to sully it with, and I think a lot of people have these arguments where you see, I go to a website, like answers.com is pretty bad with this, where it's a 20-page list of the top 20 Disney movies that you don't remember. But then every time you have to click next and you have a whole new page. And sometimes they've got 4 pages at once for every one item on the list, because if you read the whole article, they get 60 page views. And you're able to kind of retain the integrity of the approach you want to take without having to compromise that to be able to say, well, I still have to make money. I got to eat. Nate's got a little boy at home who needs to be able to be supported. And so you have to make sure that you can make money through the business side of things, but also at the same time know what those values are and know who it is that's going to, whether or not they are going to directly generate the revenue for you, but who is going to be that driver of your revenue and what they need.
Yeah, and I think that for me the key takeaway would be that there is no right, wrong. There's just the best fit for your audience. If you want to publish really, really niche topics, and this is something that I'm planning on doing too, that there's just not a lot of interest out there, but the interest that is out there is really intense. That's where a premium product would make sense. And that's, where people pay for the information. And so, there's a lot of ways to quote unquote make money online, but I think the key is to making sure it's the best fit for your audience.
Absolutely. So we've talked a lot about kind of the great side of things, everything we love about the marketing, everything you love about content strategy, but it's not all kind of roses and ponies. There are challenges that you face every day. I'm sure even in, since you've gone full time into, building your brand. Talk to us about some of the more challenging projects, or even they may be individual posts, it may be a particular problem that you ran into. What was something where you were faced with, something that almost maybe even seemed insurmountable at the time, and how you were able to tackle that problem and eventually overcome it?
I think the most challenging problem I had was one of the first assignments I had at Nebo Agency, where I was supposed to be auditing thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of duplicate content it was a luggage website. And when I got the assignment, I basically thought in my head that I was going to quit if I was going to have to actually manually audit all this content. And so what I ended up doing was figuring out how to kind of duct tape a scraper onto Excel and get everything into Excel and then audit it with a formula at scale so that I was able to do the project in, 10 hours instead of over the course of 6 months. And that did two things. One, it forced me to take on a really challenging, daunting project and to start thinking in terms of scale. How do you stop trying to focus on getting a visitor here, a visitor there, tackling a piece of content here? How do you start to think about 1,000 pieces of content? How do you start thinking about 10,000 visitors, 30,000 visitors, and how can you do that quickly and efficiently? So I think that was the most challenging project that I ended up succeeding at.
I think I'm the one that gave you that project, aren't I?
Yes, you were. You're very guilty as charged.
No, and I think and we talked about this in our Black Hat episode, where you have to have this rigorous adherence to scale. Your time is finite. Your time does not scale. You have to find some other way to be able to scale your resources, scale your understanding, use tools. And I think that's something where, you're forced to be able to overcome this adversity because it needs to be addressed. And you recognize, I think, from the beginning, and I remember that project. I remember it was frustrating and overwhelming to even just consider, where do we even start? I feel so far underwater that I can't even, see the sunlight at the top of the pool here. But you start to kind of take it away piece by piece and say, all right, let's, I think we've even talked about this as well, where we have the 5 whys, where it's like, this is a problem. And you ask why 5 times to try to get to the root is, all right, let's get to something that we can tactically execute on. Let's find something like, all right, what's the first thing? We got to get all that content in there. Why? Because we can't make any decisions without seeing all the content. Why? Because then we're making incomplete decisions. Okay, so now we know we need that content in there. All right, I don't have the time to do this. Why? Because it would take infinite hours to be able to pull all of that in. So you start to look for those solutions and those workarounds. And I think I can speak for you here almost, where that is something where, even to your point, where you are more successful in the long run, not just because you are able to solve that particular problem, but you learned a new appreciation for how to approach these problems. And that way you can turn that into, now how do I create content that scales as opposed to edit or update content at scale?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about what maybe some of the most fun projects you had. What was the one thing where you're like, hey, this one, we talked about the projects that I give you that you didn't love so much, but what are one of the projects that you kind of came around to that you said, hey, I would do this, I would do this forever, or this is the one where I still look back on it and it puts a smile on my face. It may be something where you were able to drive killer growth or killer revenue for a client or for yourself, something where you just figured something out that was just so life-changing that you look back on it and you can't help but smile and get some chills there.
I think it was near to the time when I was actually leaving Nebo Agency and starting my current business, where I was working with a national cell phone brand, and this was, they weren't well known like Verizon or AT&T, but they were a solid second tier, and basically their decision makers, their CEO, gave us carte blanche. Whatever we wanted to do with their blog, we could do with their blog. Just do it. He didn't want to think about it. We had permission. And so it gave me and our content team at Nebo a really unique opportunity where we didn't have to have these back and forths with, their internal marketing team. We didn't have to have back and forths with their developer. If we had an idea, we could just do it. And that was something that ended up winning, Nebo an award at the American Marketing Association for driving organic growth. We were able to really build that company's brand online. It was something that I enjoyed working on almost too much because, it was, again, it goes back to that virtuous feedback loop where I was able to just do something and immediately see the results on it.
And I think having that freedom, knowing that somebody sees the value in not only in the strategy, but in you personally doing it, they understand that not only do they have the right strategy, but they have the right people to execute on it, and just that complete freedom and trust to say, I'm giving you free reign. There will be no excuses if that didn't succeed. It was entirely within your power to be able to drive the successes that it did. And I think just being able to kind of really sink your teeth into it and say, you know what, there's nothing sacred here. Everything is on the table. Everything is, negotiable in terms of what you're able to execute on. And I think that's something where that autonomy to it. Oh, yeah. I imagine even just kind of seeing you talk about that, and he's got his hands going. He loves talking about that kind of stuff, because it's showing that somebody believes in you and they believe in the strategy that you want to produce, and just the part of your personality that kicks in and says, all right, well, if I'm being given this amount of freedom and flexibility, now there's no excuses. The safety net is gone. I'm up there and I've got the adrenaline going, and I'm going to make sure that it works. And obviously it was extremely successful for you.
No, and the whole thing about the safety net, I think that's one thing that's also fun in an odd way about publishing, is that it's on me, and that there's a certain amount of thrill when you know that you can't fail.
Right. So tell us a little bit, now that we talked you talked you up and said that, Nate is such a baller, everything is award-winning work. Let's talk a little bit about some of your biggest failures, and that's something that I know a lot, it's very popular advice to be able to learn from your failures as much as your successes, but I think that you should learn from your failures, but you can learn from others. And I think our listeners would really benefit from being able to hear a time where maybe you had that same flexibility or that same freedom and things didn't quite go according to plan. But more importantly, how were you able to address that? How were you able to adapt so that you could continue to have a successful career after maybe an unsuccessful campaign?
Yeah. So by far the biggest failure is in terms of time invested and money invested was, you can actually go to the site, it's homemusicgear.com. It was originally a music drop shipping site back in the day, and it was started by me and my brother, and it was just basically just posting music gear and selling it with SEO PPC. It was a miserable failure. We shut that down. I tried to transition it to a publishing site. That failed miserably. Tried to scale it up to basically a PPC lead gen site. That landed me in the Panda penalty box. And keep in mind that we're talking about hundreds of hours and thousands of dollars invested into it, just a losing idea. And anyway, right now, it's still a complete failure, but I've basically transitioned it into a sandbox site where I get to try out WordPress plugins and different things. It's basically dead. But
but you're able to kind of find a way that it also teaches you, what works and what doesn't.
Oh, yeah. No, there was a ton of lessons taken out. One is that you can't just start a site because there's search volume. You have to actually understand the audience. You have to be a part of the audience and understand what's the problems that are driving these keywords, that are driving these searches. What are they actually looking for? What do they already know? And you can't just... and I think this is a lot of problems with beginner SEOs. They know the basics of keyword research, and they just waltz in and they think, oh, there's search volume here, I can start a site and make money. It doesn't work that way. And I think that was the biggest takeaway with that.
Mm-hmm. And that even doesn't even get into the how does the business actually make money, but how do you actually drive the, how do you get the means to an end? We're not even talking about the ends yet. We're talking about trying to figure out the means. Mm-hmm. But you're able to learn, okay, now you have a new appreciation for when you went and pursued new business ideas. Mm-hmm. You know that strategy has to be there.
Yeah.
You know that you have to have, that the research and that, foundational aspect of it, where you can't be building on a house of cards. Where even if you were able to start to see some initial spikes or some initial growth, you have to be able to look at it for the, the short-term wins, but also how can this become a sustainable business for you?
Exactly.
So it's kind of along those same lines there. Let's kind of wrap it up here. We talk about this idea of sustainability. What's next for you? What's next for Shivar Web and, that from the publishing side of things for you personally? Tell us where you kind of see yourself in, we'll take the typical interview question or the, college graduation, where do you see yourself in 5 years? But how do you want to take everything that you've learned and, again, by your own admission, the non-traditional path that has led you to where you are right now, where does that path continue to lead you in the future?
I think it will be in digital, but right now I'm still, I like Google's approach, or back when they had 20% experiment time. And I try to take that model with my own business where, of course, ShivarWeb.com is my main audience. They're the audience that I know. But I'm really having a lot of fun now that I'm full-time at it, experimenting with different concepts, different websites, different content forums. I'm starting to build out a team. So I think the next 5 years will be one, figuring out how to scale high value, unique content. Number two, it will be learning about and executing on different content forms. I think that sites like BuzzFeed have really pioneered this on the big brand side, but I think there is tons and tons of room on the non-big brand, mass market side of websites to take those same concepts and same tools and apply them to publishing and really bring a lot of value to people trying to solve everyday problems or really specific problems. So I think I'll be moving in that direction.
No, it's fantastic. So let's leave our listeners with one piece of advice. Maybe it can be something where you wish you had known earlier in your career, something that you want everybody to know at this point in their career. What's the one piece of advice that you would leave our listeners with if they want to be able to experience the same successes that you have?
You have to have a pipeline of experiments and things that you're trying. You can't get feedback, positive or negative, until you do it. And so whatever the idea is, whatever the concept is, you need to just get it out in the world to get some sort of feedback so that you can either continue with it or stop it.
I know our listeners will be familiar with the concept of validated learning, and that's something where Nate actually suggested the Lean Startup for me. I've been hawking that book to everybody that I know since he introduced it to me, and the proof is in the pudding here, where, if you want really that successful, long-term, sustainable growth in your career, regardless of whether that's in digital or not, whether it's in marketing or some other related field, you have to put yourself out there to be able to learn, positively or negatively, the results or the consequences of those actions.
Yep.
All right, so Nate, give us an idea of how we might be able to reach you. If people wanted to ask any follow-up questions, obviously they can reach you on bamboochalupa.com, but where else would bamboochalupa.com and shiverweb.com, where else can our listeners kind of get in touch with you to maybe ask some follow-up questions if they're interested?
I am on Twitter @nshivar, so that's NSHIVAR. And if you just Google shiverweb.com, there's a contact form. And fun fact, I actually do respond to every single email that comes to my inbox. I know a lot of people say that, but I actually do it. So
very cool. So if you do have any other follow-up questions for Nate, feel free to check him out on bamboochalupa.com, @nshivar on Twitter, or on shiverweb.com, the contact form, and make sure you hold him to that promise. I know he's looking forward to the questions, and he will be responding to you.
All right. Well, you can find previous episodes, links to things that we mentioned, and both of our contact information at bamboochalupa.com. If you don't want to miss another episode, including the next episode where I will interview Brett about his experiences and takeaways in the agency world, go subscribe to the podcast in iTunes or your favorite podcast app, and do leave a comment and rating while you're there. We learn a lot from your feedback, and your ratings help others to discover the show. So for Brett Snyder, I'm Nate Shivar. Thank you for listening.